A reading from the book of Genesis. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is to be this way, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger." When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore, he was called Edom. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. This is the word of the Lord.
Since the death of my father-in-law, Bill O'Brien, back at the beginning of February, my wife Kim and I have redone our wills and gotten all of our important paperwork and passwords together in one place to make it easier on our kids when we pass. All of this was necessary because we live on this side of this story about Jacob and Esau. Let me explain. You see, we see our three kids as co-equal heirs, and we don't want them going through any of these biblical shenanigans to see who would inherit the birthright and the blessing from us. Now, if you would understand this story from Genesis about the sibling rivalry between the older and the younger sons of Isaac and Rebekah, you need to realize what's behind it. And in the end, you will find out some things that will disturb and delight you, depending on how you see things, though. What's behind it all is the law of primogeniture. This literally means that the firstborn son receives all, or at least 2/3, of the inheritance of the father, as well as his blessing. Now, I can just imagine telling my two amazing daughters, Cameron and Jillian, that their brother Rhett is inheriting the entirety of our massive fortune, and that I have designated him alone to be the one to carry the potency of my loins to the next generation. Right. If that were my intent, I can assure you that the woman I live with would immediately go Rebekah on all of this. She'd be scheming behind the scenes to see that the girls got their due. Ancient religions, you see, those that preceded Israel, And in fact, not just in the Near East, but as far away as India and Polynesia, we now know, held that human beings were descended from the gods, and that there was a hierarchy of order in which firstborn males were more godlike because they possessed the greatest degree of divine potency and therefore privilege. And this is why kings in every culture prayed for a legitimate male heir to whom they would pass the monarchy, even if a girl or a boy from an illicit relationship had been born first. So much intrigue ensued in every royal family over this. And I think we all know some of the best-loved Netflix series too, don't you know? The Bible is the story of God's redemptive work in the world. I think we can all agree about that. But once we say that, we should ask, redeemed from what and for what? And here we see how God is overturning oppressive social systems that excluded some in favor of others. That's the hidden message of this seemingly scandalous story of the scurrilous Jacob stealing the birthright from Esau and God going along with it. So what's God up to in this story? Let's look a little closer. Esau was named Esau because he was hairy. That's literally what the name means. He ended up being a hunter, and his daddy loved the game he came home with. Rebekah had a different game in mind, though. When Jacob came in second, when he came out of the womb second, he came out smooth. It turns out he was a smooth operator, too. They named him Jacob because it means heel. He was probably grasping at Esau's heel when he followed him out of the womb, as if almost to grab him, to pull him back so he could be first instead. The word heel in the Hebrew has a double meaning, just as it does in English. Jacob was a trickster. He was a usurper or a supplanter, a con man who looked out for his own interest. And Rebekah, his mother, enabled him, justifying it as a divine mandate that God had tipped her off to when the boys were kicking in her womb. Jacob cons his brother out of his birthright. He seizes the moment, no doubt with the aid of his mother. When Esau comes in from hunting one day, he is famished. And Jacob has prepared his State Fair award-winning 5-alarm Texas chili. No awards this year, sadly, as the fair is canceled. But Esau can't resist. "Give me some of that red stuff," he says. Hardly a foodie, that Esau. A few years ago, the comedian Tina Fey did a commercial where she was standing in a grocery store checkout line, and she was so hungry that she grabbed a bag of chips and started eating them right there in the line. Turns out she had pulled a package of potpourri instead. Yummy. It's best, you see, not to make life-changing decisions when you are desperately hungry. Esau would have done just about anything for that stew, and Jacob made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Esau sold his birthright for a mess of pottage, as the King James Version put it, and my, the mess that followed. Esau would live the rest of his life with the smell of that stew in his nostrils. And Jacob would too, because this set off a chain of events that took a lifetime to resolve, as we learn from reading on. Jacob wouldn't just settle for the birthright. He went on to conspire with his mother to steal Isaac's blessing from Esau too, which meant that he would have the power of procreation and prosperity that would flow from Isaac to his line now. This hardly seems fair unless you realize that primogeniture was far from fair itself. Here's where it gets more interesting. God, we are told, chose Jacob and not Esau to carry forward the promises made to Abraham and Sarah. And this, I think, offends our moral sensibilities, doesn't it? I mean, not that Esau was any paragon of virtue, mind you. He was entirely uncaring about important things, being preoccupied with his hunting and his hunger. So don't be like Esau. But Jacob, this was a world-class cad. Don't be like Jacob either. And we could say the same for Isaac and Rebekah. Don't be like them. And yet God uses this family to bless the world. Go figure. St. Augustine used this story of God choosing Jacob and not Esau as a typology of salvation by grace alone, not by works. It was precisely because Jacob was so undeserving that he became the father of nations. Grace brings about virtue, Augustine said, not the other way around. And there's something to that. But then he went on to say that that part about God foretelling all this to Rebekah reveals a doctrine of predestination. That is to say, if it's all about God and not us, all about divine grace, not human merit, then God must have determined everything beforehand, which means that God chose some of us in Jacob to be saved and some of us in Esau to be damned. Now that's a damnable doctrine, to be sure. And it has infected the church ever since and continues to divide the world into the saved and lost, the blessed and the cursed, the insider and the outsider. It's the same dynamic that keeps churches thinking that they can decide who can preside at the Lord's table, who can serve at the Lord's table, who can even sit and partake at the Lord's table. Goodness, what a mess of pottage. Where Augustine went wrong was this. God chose Jacob, yes, rather than Esau. But that was not about an election unto salvation. It was an election for mission. Instead of authorizing the church to proclaim a whole new world of discrimination based on the winner by grace, Jacob, it was meant to do just the opposite. By choosing the second child, God was overturning the world's culture of preference for the firstborn. By choosing a family of nomads to stand at the riverhead of faith, God was overturning the culture's world of preference for the rich and powerful. By choosing people of questionable character even, God was overturning the world's preference for separating everyone into categories of good and bad. Here's the genius of God and the really good news. When you start from the outskirts, from the fringes, from the forsaken of the world, and bring them inward, toward the center, where God is, you don't miss anyone. God accepts us all. This is the way God works. Everyone is chosen. Everyone is loved. Everyone is included, even you. Have you ever wondered? See, fast forward to Jesus now. Have you ever wondered why God came to save us through a man who came from a minority group? Jesus was a Jew who was considered marginal by the power brokers even of his own religion in the day. He was a man born under a cloud of suspicion about his legitimacy, his conception, to a young woman and her husband who came from the hinterlands of Galilee. And why is it, do you imagine, that our salvation is linked to his being lynched on a tree? It's because this is the way God works. And this is how the church must work too, if it wants to claim to be the church of Jesus Christ. The church must side with those who have been silenced and sidelined, those who have suffered and been segregated among us. The church in America, I tell you, will truly understand its own salvation only when we join God in the way God works. Right now, the hope for the church in America, I think, is found in listening. Listening to the voices of Black and Latinx and Native American and LGBTQ and differently abled persons, all of whose lives matter. Listen to me carefully. There is no such thing theologically as the white church. That is a cultural construct of our own making, and it has given preferred authority to white, straight, married men and all those who would cooperate with that hierarchy of order, despite what it has meant to our overall spiritual condition or the ways we have influenced the culture. And really, how many of you fit that definition? You see how narrow that is? That you should have to depend upon people like me to feel fully loved and included in the heart of God? When we find ourselves defending cultural assumptions that keep some people in charge over others because of flimsy ideas of superiority due to birth order or marital status or skin color, or whatever, we are resisting the work of God that wants to liberate us all and make us true siblings of the Spirit in this one great, wide, diverse, and glorious community of faith. The church has been missing the point entirely for entirely too long. God has not called us to be protectors of privilege, defenders of a civilization that is built on the backs of the oppressed. We have good news to tell instead, and to live together too. And together we are doing just that, Wilshire, because we are all of us loved and blessed and included. All of us. Everybody. Praise be to God. Amen.